It all started here, in San Jose, California, when Tamika's family decided to join the Nation of Yahweh.
At the age of 12, my family had converted to what's called the Nation of Yahweh. If I had to liken it to explaining it to someone, it would be a cross between Jehovah's Witness and the Nation of Islam. But anyway, we worshiped a man who actually claimed to be the Son of God. They called him Yahweh ben Yahweh. Yes, we read, the Bible, King James Version of the Bible, but then we also, anyone who wasn't, of this complexion or, considered, African American, they were considered devils or, unclean. And so we weren't allowed to go with anyone outside of really who we knew inside the areas. Anything that was Christian, oh God, Christians, they were the enemy, anything Christian, that was totally wrong. So you never were supposed to associate with Christians at all. But this one day things had changed. It was really interesting. We were on the bus going there to the temple, and we didn't make it there because you looked out the windows and you saw that the police were raiding the temple. I now know what happened, but at the time it was really confusing. Like, why is the FBI, raiding the temple? Well, come to find out, the guy who claimed to be, the Son of God, Yahweh ben Yahweh, he was charged on racketeering and the beheading of an ex-member. So, here it is that, our Savior, is getting charged for these, type of crimes and these things. And so for the longest time, I was really confused. And, I just really didn't believe in anything. For a long time, I think I came, slightly teetering on atheist, agnostic, kind of back and forth. What's interesting is that he ended up dying of prostate cancer. So, with that, it kind of left a void. And I was probably about 13 or so, kind of left a void. I know I'm, for myself, I just didn't believe in anything because it was really hard to try to believe in something where you thought that, it was really true, but then to turn out that it really wasn't.
At the age of 14, while dealing with the void left in her life from her church, Tamika discovered something about herself that she dare not share with anyone. While her friends were attracted to the opposite sex, she felt an attraction towards other girls.
At about 14, 15, just a lot of questioning and going on with my identity and who I was and, why I was having feelings for, the same sex versus, the opposite sex, when that's usually what happens at that age. And, so at 14, 15, I'm like, okay, so what's going on? Number one, my parents didn't agree with, anything outside of, that particular lifestyle, heterosexual lifestyle. So I couldn't really talk to them, and I tried to, but it just didn't, work. But, but then I felt like I really didn't have anyone to talk to or to speak to about what I was going through, especially the inner turmoil in mind and, going back to, there was just so much going on. And so for myself, I really got to a point that I felt, gosh, no one understands me, no one would understand even if I try to ask them and reach out to them. And, about 14, 15, so about 15, I had made a decision that I was going to commit suicide. Then I remember going in taking a bunch of pills, and I have no clue what I took, but really knowing that, okay, I'm not going to be here anymore. And I remember taking them and, falling, asleep, and I thought I would be gone. But then all of a sudden I wake up the next day like, whoa.
Tamika saw her survival as a license to live a life with no boundaries. She took this attitude to Howard University in Washington, D.C., where she experimented with drugs, alcohol, and same-sex dating.
What's next? Pretty much partying. That was the thing that would be able to fill up some space and some time without having to do school. I met a group of individuals and friends, had a great time, still ended up going to college, went to Howard University over in Washington, D.C. When I was over here before going to college, what was introduced was more like, at that time, it was crank. Wasn't a lot of it, but that was my first introduction. But when I went over to Washington, D.C., things completely changed. The environment, the people, my eyes were open to just so much in the world. And of course, not having any type of foundation, any type of solid foundation at all, and just saying, I'm going to do what I want, when I want, how I want to do it, is exactly what happened.
Back in California, Tamika continued a life of worldly indulgence, which took its toll, leaving her jobless and directionless.
So I came back to California. Actually, it was about the time, it was probably about 2000 or so, 99, 2000, when they started to do a lot of startup .com jobs. And so I actually ended up getting involved and employed by a company. It was a great company, first front desk admin, doing stuff that I like at a young age and making a pretty decent, amount of money. And, doing that decent amount of money and not really doing anything with my life, but decent amount of money equals more money to party. The job didn't last long because, when you party from Thursday all the way to Sunday, only have Tuesday, Wednesday to recover, and then do it back again on Thursday, you can't maintain a solid lifestyle. You can't maintain a solid job for that. And so the job didn't end up lasting for too long. And so that led to, okay, fine, no job. I have unemployment. I could do unemployment and party too. And did that. Stayed a whole bunch in San Francisco, but it came a point in time where I'm like, okay, I'm not doing anything, and this is kind of getting a little bit old. And I remember in about 2000 or so, my dad actually had looked at the newspaper and he saw, it was a little small square, and he saw a thing, call to women being carpenters. And I was like, a carpenter? That's kind of, like working with my hands, why not? I'll try to do it. And it was a whim because, my parents, they were like, what are you going to do what are you doing with your life? What are you doing with yourself? And at the time, of course, it was nothing. They didn't know everything that was going on, but they knew that I wasn't doing anything. And I had stayed with them for a little bit in between that time. And so I remember my dad, calling out, and I said, I'll go. And that was probably one of the best decisions, the most life-turning decisions as far as career-wise that I could have done. Now, granted, started doing it and still partying because sometimes, it's still a long time to take before getting a job and in between union jobs. And, so still having that type of lifestyle. But in between that time, that's when, I liken it to, me starting my apprenticeship, it was a big apprenticeship, Union 405 with the Carpenters Union. But as I started my apprenticeship is actually the time that God met me in my walk. And what's really interesting, starting to do the carpentry, started to do the apprenticeship, but at that time, I was still partying. I remember there was a time, it was my birthday, and a friend of mine had came, so this was August, a friend of mine had came to the club, and he said hi to me. We used to party together all the time. He was in the same lifestyle, everything. And saw him once and, exchanged numbers.
With a chance encounter, Tamika's story would begin to change forever. God uses a promise made to a friend to start Tamika on a journey to find Jesus.
When I first met Tamika, we were at this dance club in San Francisco, and this was a place that basically stayed open pretty much throughout the weekend. You could count on going there 6 in the morning on a Sunday. We actually called it church. And I remember when I met her because she had blonde hair. It was cut short like a boy's haircut, but she could dance. I mean, this girl could groove. It was so cool. And I think that's how we just kind of connected, because we were both really into just dancing. We really loved dancing. Anytime we wanted to go out, we were on the phone with one another, and we became kind of like best friends, just hanging out, just going to clubs, drinking, smoking, and doing drugs. And I think that's kind of where our friendship really took a bad turn, because the drugs got a lot in the way, and we found ourselves partying in people's houses over the weekend, and one minute feeling really great about being in the environment, and then the next minute just feeling like we're just totally wasting our lives. And and just kind of going through life, going nowhere. That continued for some time until I eventually decided that this life wasn't for me. I knew that I had been called for greater things and that God had a purpose for my life. And one day while I was in that club, the Lord just spoke to me and he told me to leave that place. But Tamika stayed. And a lot of the reason why she stayed because Tamika, like myself, another commonality we had is we both struggled with our identity. We struggled with homosexuality. We struggled with identifying who we were and who we were born to be. But eventually I did come out of that. I did come out of that whole lifestyle, the partying, the drugs, the homosexuality, and all of that. And Tamika just started to notice that there was a change in me. We still stayed friends. I still loved her as my friend unconditionally, even though she still continued to party. And I remember one day that it was near her birthday, and she sent me a message asking me or inviting me to come out to her birthday celebration, which was gonna be, guess where? The famous club where we first met.
It's really interesting because, I'm thinking, okay, where's ecstasy? Where's drugs? And he was like, so are you gonna do anything? And he's like, no, I'm not gonna. I have church tomorrow. You have church? And it tickled me because I'm like, and for whatever reason, I know what it is now, but for whatever reason, I said, I'll go with you.
She took the bait. She took my challenge and said she was going to come to church. She actually spoke it from her mouth and said she's going to go to church. And even though she partied like she normally does, doing the ecstasy and drinking, she woke up the next morning and we went to church. And that marked the day that Tamika was changed.
And he kind of had this shocked look on his face, and it's almost like kind of evangelism 101, like if someone says they'll go with you to church, you just don't react a certain way, but he did. And I said, well, why are you reacting? He said, no, don't mind me, but yeah, sure, I'll pick you up, to take you to church. I said, okay, that's fine. I still got high, still did my thing, but notice he didn't do it. He didn't do anything really. So the next day comes, and I'm almost forgetting about what I had said I was going to do. And he calls me up and he says, hey, so I'm here to pick you up for church. Oh, I did agree to that, huh? Okay. So I went, and it was a little small church. It wasn't even big at all. It couldn't hold any more than like maybe 200 people. But we go in, to the door, and there are like hands raised, and people are crying and stuff. And I said, oh, great, we came in at a great time. People are crying, and they're singing the song on the screen. And I'm thinking, oh God, what did I get myself into? And we walk in, and I'm thinking we're gonna sit in the back. But no, we go all the way to the front.
I sat her right in the front, actually, of the church. And we sat there, and that day there was actually a prophetic minister. And the interesting thing about the prophetic minister being there, now that I think about it, is that when we were in the party scene, Tamika was always using her psychic, what she called like a psychic gift, on ways of just kind of being able to read people's mail, as we call it. And she would be pretty on the dot, and people would be amazed. And so here she is in this church, and God meets her with a challenge of something that she's familiar with, that she used to do to other people.
Now the pastor, who he was away on a missionary trip, but it was a prophet that was there. And I didn't know what a prophet was, but I just figured it was a guest speaker. So the prophet starts speaking and going through and talking about sermon. And to this day, I have no clue what he was talking about. I really, really don't. However, it spoke like it cut, like it spoke to my mind, my heart, everything that he was saying. And I swear, if I could probably go back and have a camera there, I'd probably have my jaw dropped like, the whole time listening to what he was saying. And, at the end of his message, he said, if this message has touched your heart, I'd like to pray for you. Please, come up to the front afterwards so we can pray. And I'm like, oh no, I'm not going up to the front. I came and I did the church thing, and that's it.
No sooner than the message was done and the prophet had finished speaking, Tamika was ready to go. And she said, I'm ready to go. She said, let's go. I was like, okay, you want to go? So we get up and we're walking out the church. And as soon as we get to the door, the prophet says, you. And he points at her and she stops, frozen in her tracks.
And I was just about to go out the door and something stopped me. And, when it stopped me, it was a force that said, look to the front, turn around and look to the front. And as I did, I was about to do it, and I turned and I looked at the front, and the prophet looked dead at me. He goes, no, wait, stop. God has a message for you. Please come up to the front so I can pray for you. And in my mind, I'm thinking, oh, great. There's people that are going to be watching me. Okay, I'll go. And so I went. And he met me, kind of at the altar, walked down, and he met me. And he started to just talk about things about my life, my confusion. And I'm getting so overwhelmed thinking, how does he know these things? How does he know these things about me? How does he know what I'm going through? What's going on?
And just like she used to read everybody else's mail, that prophet reads her mail and tells her about her life and what she's doing, and that she's lost, and she's lost her identity. And he speaks to the core of Tamika, and she becomes defenseless. So defenseless that she falls under an unfamiliar power.
Jesus, I don't even know who you are, but how do you know that? I know it can't be any psychic thing, because there's no way that you can know those things in my heart. And so as he's doing this, and I'm having these internal thoughts, he says, can I pray for you? And I said, yeah, you can pray for me. And he does. And as he's praying, I'm hearing things, my spirit's hearing things that he's saying, which have all come to true, really, about, women that are going to come into my life, that are going to be speaking to my life. Jesus is going to become real to me. Just different things on what was about to happen in my life. And as he's doing this, my spirit's hearing this, but I'm also having this dialogue with God in my head, like, wait a minute. He's praying for me, and I'm thinking, wow, Jesus, I don't know who you are. Matter of fact, I don't even believe in you. I said, but this really does feel real. And if you show me who you are, and if you really reveal to me who you are, I will follow you. And as I'm saying this, and as he's praying for me, literally my hands go from where they were to my sides, and they just come up in surrender. And before I knew it, I was down on the ground. I was just down.
That moment when Tamika got up, she was changed. She knew there was something more to God, and she had to find out what it was.
And then from that moment, things changed. It was really interesting because, when leaving the church, I'm thinking, okay, now what? I had this crazy experience, this Jesus that I have no clue about, but what do I do with this? But literally from that point, the drug usage stopped. My void that I needed to fill was knowing, who was this Jesus? What was this experience that I just experienced? And so from that point, it was a journey to find out who Jesus was.
And so Tamika did her homework. She began to get grounded in the church, and she began to search for who she really was. Who was this scared girl inside of her that just wanted to know who God was? She did the work. She started understanding who she was as a woman of God. She started to grow and go on mission trips. And slowly but surely, God brought that gift out of her, that prophetic gift even, and she started seeing purpose in her life.
So Christmas is about to come onto the scene, and so like the Discovery Channel, they end up playing the shows about Jesus, and so that's how I learned about the walk and about the different biblical things, and it really amazed me, like, oh wow, this is a real person. But what's really ironic about it is the same Bible that I read when, being in the nation of Yahweh, was the same Bible that, I would be reading, even today. Really interesting, but it just depends on your eyes and reading it, what lens you have over when you're doing things and when you read things. So as that's happening and I'm going on this, crazy God search, I'm also too attending, little Bible study here and there, not really church, but kind of Bible study here and there, asking questions. Pastor Hoa was actually the pastor of that church, and I actually ended up getting acclimated into that church and doing a lot of the Bible study, going in, just asking questions on top of questions on top of questions until I just didn't have any questions anymore. And it was really amazing that it wasn't, someone saying that my lifestyle was wrong. It was truly me finding a relationship with God to the point where I said, you know what? If the way that I'm living my life is not correct, if the way that I'm living is not right, well, then I give you permission to change some things. I was able to see things about myself that before never came about. You're searching for something, you don't know what it is, but when you finally find it, the world is open up to you. And that's one of the things that did happen to me, in my life. Don't get me wrong, was it easy? No, it wasn't. The change from that point of being at the church to the transition to even where I'm at now, it was a hard one. Again, because my mindset and the things that I wanted, my flesh, that kind of thing, it was difficult. But in the end, when I allowed myself to say, okay, God, help me in these areas, because obviously I'm destructing. Obviously what I'm doing is wrong. So help me in that time in order to be a better person, to change my life, and for me to know who you are. And again, at the time, I believed in my heart, and it wasn't probably until February, it was February of 2001 is when I actually confessed with my mouth that Jesus Christ was Lord. So I believed in my heart then, and going through what I was going through, and I confessed with my mouth Jesus Christ was Lord in February of 2001.
She's a mother, a wife, a friend, a minister. And because of Jesus Christ, she's also changed.
I have a daughter. She's 4 right now. I am expecting another one, on my birthday in August. And, I was married 2007. My husband of now, it'll be 7 years in November. So, hey, look, God can do it for me. He can do it for you.
In confessing Jesus Christ as her Lord and Savior, Tamika's life was truly changed.
My name is Lamont, and my friend Tamika has been changed.
Hi, my name is Tamika, and I've been changed.
Thank you so much for watching. I am Tamisa Lewis. Remember, Jesus loves you. If you have a story to share, email us at content@anchoritv.com.
What about you? Has your life changed? Is it being changed? We would love to hear your story.